During the renovation of the Palacencian walls, workers accidentalized a hidden compartment. Inside was a map drawn on yellowed parchment. Date 1623. The gold veins marked on the map matched exactly with modern charts when Traoré held the map in his hands. He had found proof of how the West had systematically exploited Africa's wealth for 400 years. The discovery was made on a Tuesday morning in what had once been the colonial governor's mansion. A grand structure built in the late 19th century now served as one of the presidential working residences in Ouagadougou. President Ibrahim Traoré ordered the renovation after structural engineers warned that the east wing damage during previous political needed urgent repairs. Abdul Kate, the chief restoration architect, was supervising the removal of damaged plaster from a section of wall when his team uncovered something unusual. Asmel alcove that appeared to have been deliberately sealed decades, perhaps centuries, earlier. "Mr. President, we found something you should see," Conant said over the secure phone line established for the renovation project. When Traoré arrived an hour later, workers had carefully expanded the opening, revealing a cavity roughly the size of Asmel. Safe inside was a cylindrical container, tarnished with age, but remarkably intact. The presidential security detail insisted on scanning it for explosives or other hazards before allowing it to be removed. "It appears to be 18th century, possibly earlier," Kate said, examining the container Scrafsenzen's European design, but with North African influences in the metalwork. Traoré watched with measured interest as Kate, wearing conservation gloves, carefully unscrewed the container's cap. From inside, he extracted a roll of what appeared to be parchment, protected by an outer layer of oilcloth that had preserved it remarkably well despite Burkina Faso's harsh climate. "We should take this to the conservation lab before attempting to unroll it," Conant advised. "No," Traoré replied, his military training making him cautious about letting such a discovery out of his sight. "Open either, under Traoré's watchful gaze." Kate gently unrolled the parchment on a clean table brought in for the purpose. What emerged was a detailed map of West Africa, recognizable despite using archaic place names and geographic feeders that had since changed. Most remarkably, the map was marked with a network of lines, symbols, and annotations in faded brown ink. "This appears to be a mining or resource map," Conant said, studying the markings. "And judging by the script and cartographic style, it dates from the early 17th century." In the corner of the map was an ornate cartoon containing text in Portuguese and what appeared to be a date. Traoré leaned closer, his interest note fully engaged. As a leader who had come to power, promising to reclaim Burkina Faso's mineral wealth from foreign exploitation, he immediately telegraphed the potential significance of such a discovery. "I want this analyzed immediate. Bring in experts, but keep this absolutely confidential," he ordered. Over the next 72 hours, a small team of historians, geologists, and linguists worked in a secure room within the presidential compound, meticulously the ancient map. What they discovered would shake the foundations of West Africa's colonial history and provide Traoré with an unexpected weapon in his ongoing battle for resources of Aricti. The map created by Portuguese explorers nearly 400 years earlier, detailed with astonishing geography the location of gold deposits across what would later become Burkina Faso, Mali, Ghana, and Suriname. Modern Geological Service conducted. With advanced technology, in late 20th and early 21st century, Shad identified these same deposits, often presented by Western mining companies as new discoveries, justifying their exclusive extraction rights. Most damning were the annotations in the margins written in a mixture of Portuguese and an early form of mercantile code that the linguists essentially deciphered. They contained explicit instructions for concealing the extent of the region's mineral wealth from local populations, strategies for exploiting resources with minimal investment, and methods for ensuring That processed gold returned to European capitals rather than enriching African kingdom. One passage translated from Portuguese was particularly explicit. The natives must never learn the true extent of the yellow metal beneath their soil. Foreknowledge of such wealth would empower resistance against rightful European guidance and commerce. When the analysis was complete, Traoré sat alone in his office, reviewing the comprehensive report. The implications were staggering. For centuries, European powers had known precisely where Africa's gold reserves were located, information they had deliberately while crafting narratives about discovering resources and bringing development to the continent. The historical deception aligned perfectly with contemporary experiences. Western mining corporations continued to enter African nations with claims offering staking exploration, demanding generous concessions and tax benefits for discovering mineral deposits that it no appeared had been documented in European archives for centuries. Traoré considered his options carefully. As a military strategist, he understood that information was often more powerful than weapons, but only when deployed at the right moment and in the right context. 3 days after receiving the analysis, he convened a private meeting with elders of 5 neighboring West African nations, all of whom faced similar challenges with foreign mining interest. The gathering was kept off official schedules with leaders arriving under the pretense of regional security tiscons. In a secure conference room beneath the presidential palace, Traoré unveiled the map and its analysis to his fellow leader. "What you are seeing," he told them, "is evidence of a deception spanning. For centuries, the colonial powers and now their corporate descendants have never been discovering your resource. They have always known exactly where our wealth lies, information they kept from us while extracting that wealth for themselves." President Yallo of Guinea studied the map intently. "This confirms what we have long suspected. The evidence Hazelways, then circumstantial. Would this weapon demonstrate that the entire colonial narrative about bringing progress through resource discovery was a calculated lie? More importantly," added President Go of Mali, "it undermines the legal foundation of many current mining concessions. If these companies claim discovery rights for deposits that were already documented in European archives, their contracts were secured under false pretenses." The leaders spent hours discussing how best to use this historical evidence to strengthen their position in ongoing negotiations with foreign mining interests. The consensus that emerged was both bold and strategic. They would not immediately telepolize the map, but would instead use it as leverage in a coordinated negotiation of mining contracts across their respective countries. "We should approach this methodically," Traoré advised. "Each of us will confront the primary mining corporations in our countries with this evidence privately, demanding substantially improved terms that reflect the truth. They are not just staking discoverers, but rather the latest beneficiaries of centuries of deliberate exploitation." Before the meeting concluded, the leaders established the West African Resource Sovereignty Alliance, a formal framework for coordinating their approach to foreign mining interests and ensuring that no country could be isolated or pressured into accepting unfavorable terms. 2 weeks later, in the gleaming headquarters of Mandeel Mining Corporation in Toronto, CEO Richard Patterson was having the worst day of his professional life. Across from him sat Ibrahim Traoré, flanked by Burkina Faso's Minister of Mines and a small team of legal advisors. "This is absurd," Patterson sputtered, staring at the Theowakladi reproduction of the 1623 map Traoré had placed on the conference table. "You're suggesting that a 400-year-old document somehow invalidates modern mining contracts negotiate in good faith." "Note invalidates," Traoré corrected calmly. "Contextualize your company entered Burkina Faso claiming to be taking extraordinary risks to discover gold deposits. Risks that justified your claiming 88% of their availed from those deposits. This map, which has been authenticated by independent experts, demonstrates that European interests have known the location of these deposits for centuries. He leaned forward slightly. What we are offering is not cancellation off your contracts, but renegotiation, based on historical truth rather than colonial fiction. Montiel Mining can continue to operate in Burkina Faso, but under terms that reflect reality. A 60/40 revenue split in our favor. Mandatory technology transfer and processing facilities built within our borders. Patterson's face flushed with hunger. This is nothing short of nationalization. Our shareholders will never accept such terms. Your shareholders have enjoyed unprecedented trends based on a historical lie, Traoré responded, his voice still measured. But with steel beneath it, they will continue to profit. Just note at the exploitative levels colonial thinking has led them to expect. Hestood gathering his materials. You have your own week to begin good faith negotiations on these terms. After that, we will release this historical evidence publicly. File formal complaints with international arbitration bodies and pursue legal remedies for contracts secured under demonstrably false pretenses. As Traoré and his team departed, Patterson immediately Caladethi Company's legal department, government relations team, and major shareholder. The consensus that emerged from these frantic consultations was reluctant but clear. Fighting this battle publicly would be disastrous, potentially triggering similar challenges across multiple African nations where the company operated. By the end of the week, Montiel Mining had agreed to preliminary terms for negotiating its presence. In Burkina Faso, similar scenes played out in corporate offices from Paris to Beijing's mining companies operating across West Africa suddenly faced coordinatements for fundamentally restructured refintions. What made the situation particularly challenging for these corporations was that the West African nations weren't seeking to simply expel foreign mining interests, a move that might have triggered international interest, but rather to establish more equitable partnerships based on documented historical realities that Thai companies found difficult to dispute. 3 months after the discovery of the map, Ibrahim Traoré addressed a special session of the Pan-African Parliament in Johannesburg. It was time he had to see Tedo share the discovery more broadly with African community. For generations, he told the assembled representatives from across the continent, "We have been told a story about our resource." That story portrayed Europeans and later Western corporations as intrepid explorers, risking capital and expertise to discover mineral wealth that was supposedly knew nothing about. On the large screens behind him, apiritigrezonial images of the 1623 map alongside modern geological survey showing the remarkable correlation between what Portuguese explorers had documented 4 centuries earlier and what mining companies claimed to have discovered in recent decades. This map, found hidden in what was once a colonial Guerner's residence, tells a story of systematic deception spanning century. A story of resources now, but kept secret. Wealth extracted but never shared. Knowledge hoarded to maintain power imbalances that persist to this day. The chamber fell silent as African legislators absorbed the implications of what they were seeing. For many, it confirmed suspicions they had long held, but could never definitively prove that the narrative of Western discovery of African resources was fundamentally dishonest. Today, we're not simply sharing historical events, Traoré continued. We are announcing that the West African Resource Sovereignty Alliance has successfully renegotiated terms with every major mining corporation operating through our territory. These new agreements recognize our rightful ownership of sources that were never truly discovered by these companies and establish partnerships that reflect this reality. He outlined the transformative majority revenue shares for African nations, mandatory in-country processing facilities, technology transfer requirements, and transparent account of all extracted resource. Most significantly, he announced the establishment of the Pan-African Mining Academy, an institution dedicated to ensuring that future generations of Africans would have the technical expertise to manage their own mineral wealth without dependency on foreign corporation. The international reaction to Traoré's revelation and the subsequent contract renegotiations was predictably mixed. Western financial publications decried resource nationalism and warned of declining from investment. Political commentators questioned the authenticity of the map, suggesting it might be Amadouran forgery created to justify Protestant policy goals. But that carefully documented provenance of the discovery, including independent authentication by European historical experts who had no incentive to authenticate it, made such dismissal difficult to sustain. More significantly, the coordinated approach of multiple African nations prevented isolation and economic pressure that had traditionally been applied to individual countries that challenged Western resource interest. 6 months after the map's discovery, the tangible impacts of the renegotiated relations were becoming visibly across West Africa. In Burkina Faso, construction had begun on the nation's first gold refinery, ending the centuries-old practice of exporting raw gold for processing in European facilities. Tax revenues from mining operations had increased by over 300%. Funding new schools, hospitals, and infrastructure projects, most telling ways shift in how Western mining corporations presented themselves into region. Gone was the narrative of intrepid explorers discovering African resource. Instead, corporate communications now emphasized technical expertise, capital investment, and mutually beneficial partnerships. A tacit acknowledgement that the old colonial storyline had been permanently undermined. For Ibrahim Traoré, the map had provided more than just leverage for contract negotiation. It had offered a powerful symbol that resonated across Africa and the broader global South. Tangible evidence of how historicalities had been crafted to justify ongoing economic relationships that privileged former colonial powers. What found hidden in that wall, he told Agathering of university students in Ouagadougou, was more than just a map of gold deposits. It was a map of deception, a physical artifact proving how information about our own resources was deliberately kept from us to maintain systems of exploitation. The 1623 map, now carefully preserved and prominently displayed in the National Museum of Burkina Faso, had become a powerful educational tool. School groups regularly visited the exhibit, learning how resource exploitation had been maintained, not just through military and economic power, but through the strategic control of information across centuries. 1 year after the discovery, Traoré hosted a regional economic summit, Ouagadougou. Representatives from mining companies now sat as equals with African leaders rather than dictating terms. Western diplomats, initially dismissive of the resource nationalism they predicted would collapse within months, now grudgingly acknowledged the sustainability of the new arrangement. Most significantly, African technical experts, many trained in the newly established mining academy, were increasingly assuming leadership roles in resource management across the continent. The knowledge monopoly thought had underpinned centuries of exploitation was gradually been dismantled. During a private moment at the summit, President of Guinea pulled Traoré aside. He said with a thoughtful expression, "What's most remarkable isn't that they knew where our gold was for 400 years. It's that they managed to keep that knowledge from us for so long." Traoré nodded. Control of information has always been as valuable as control of territory, perhaps more so. And now? Dio asked. No, have both the information and the inventory, Traoré replied. The question is, what we build with them. The answer to that question was still unfolding across West Africa, but the early indicators were promising. Their negotiated resource relationships hadn't triggered the economic collapse predicted by Western economy. Instead, increased revenue retention, local processing, and skill development were creating more diversified economies less vulnerable to commodity price fluctuation. Perhaps most importantly, the psychological impact of the map's discovery had extended far beyond the specific issue of mining contracts. If they'd fundamentally challenged the narrative of Western benevolence and expertise that had shaped international exchange. Since the colonial era, if historical truth had been a carefully constructed deception, what if they received wisdoms about global economic relationships might seem a lure-like question. 2 years after workers had first uncovered the hidden compartment to the palace wall. Ibrahim Traoré stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York. On the screen's bend him was an image of the 1623 map that had transformed his nation's relationships with its resources. This mob, he told the assembled world leaders, teaches us that history is not merely a record of what happened, but a tool that shapes current realities. For centuries, the narrative of discovery justified economic relationships that flowed primarily in one direction, from south to north, from formerly colonizado former colonizers. He gestured to them. Evidence like this helps us question those narratives and reimagine relations based on historical truth rather than convenient fictions. This is not about blame for past actions, but about clarity for future partnerships. As he concluded his address, Traoré shared news that brought the assembly to its feet. The West African Resource Sovereignty Alliance had established the Continental Knowledge Repository, a digital platform where historic documents related to Africa's resources, traditionally scattered in European archives or kept in corporate repositories, would be made freely available to African governments, researchers, and citizens. 400 years ago, knowledge about Africa's gold, washed on from Africans, locked away in European archives and used to facilitate to extraction rather than development. Today, we are reclaiming not just our resources, but the knowledge about those our sources that is rightfully ours. Their repository would begin with mining and resource documentation, but would eventually expand to include agricultural research, tradition knowledge, and historical records, creating a comprehensive information base for African development controlled by African institution. The 400-year roadmap that had been hidden in a palace wall had catalyzed more than just renegotiated mining contracts. It had sparked a fundamental reassessment over information about Africa's resource had been controlled and by whom. In doing so, it had opened the possibility of new relationships between Africa and the world, between resources and development, between past exploitation's future partnership built on more honest foundations than had existed for centuries. For Ibrahim Traoré, the map had provided something he had not expected when workers first uncovered the hidden compartment. Not just leverage for immediate political gain, but a powerful symbol that helped an entire continent reimagine its relationship with its own wealth and thrall that had extracted it for so long. The small yellowed parchment with its fading ink markings had accomplished what armies and ideologies could not. It had changed the story of Reselabout itself and forced the world to acknowledge a truth long buried in plaster and politics that the continent's resources had never been discovered by outsiders. On light, liberally hidden from those to whom they rightfully belong.